Right now, the best-selling electric vehicle brand on the entire planet is not Tesla. It is a Chinese company called BYD. In 2025, BYD sold 2.26 million electric cars, while Tesla's deliveries fell to 1.64 million. This is the same company that makes a small electric car called the Seagull, which sells for around $12,000 in China, with a shorter range version going for under $10,000. For comparison, the average price of an electric vehicle in the United States is more than $52,000, according to Cox Automotive. So, here is the strange part. The cheapest, fastest-selling, most talked-about electric cars in the world exist. They are real, and millions of people drive them every single day. But you cannot buy a single one of them in America. Not because they are illegal to build, not because they failed some safety test, but because the United States has deliberately constructed a wall around its car market designed to stop these specific vehicles at the door. This video is about how that wall was built, what it is actually made of, and why it is not one law, but two very different mechanisms stacked on top of each other. Because the word banned is a simplification, there is no single piece of paper that says no Chinese EVs allowed. Instead, there is a tariff so steep it makes importing them pointless, and a national security rule that targets the software and hardware inside them. Understanding how those two pieces fit together tells you almost everything about where the auto industry and the wider US-China technology rivalry are heading. If you enjoy videos about the technology and policy quietly reshaping the world, hit like and subscribe so you never miss one. Now, let us get into it, starting with the blunt instrument. The tariff wall. On the 14th of May 2024, President Biden announced that the United States would apply Section 301 tariffs on an estimated $18 billion worth of Chinese goods. And that package included a 100% tariff on all electric vehicles from China. That doubled the existing rate. The tariff on Chinese EVs jumped from 25% straight to 100%. Section 301 refers to a provision of the Trade Act of 1974, a piece of United States domestic law that allows the government to impose trade penalties on countries it accuses of unfair practices. This was not a snap decision. It came out of a formal review by the United States Trade Representative, and on the 13th of September 2024, USTR Catherine Tai announced the final version of the tariff increases. They took effect on the 27th of September 2024, and this was a genuinely public process. The agency received more than 1,100 public comments before finalizing it. The stated economic reasoning was about overcapacity and subsidies. According to the White House, China's exports of EVs grew by 70% between 2022 and 2023. And officials argued that extensive subsidies and non-market practices were creating a serious risk of a global glut of cheap cars. Biden put it plainly, saying China's policies could flood our market with its vehicles, posing risks to our national security, and adding, "I'm not going to let that happen on my watch." Now, a 100% tariff sounds like it should be the end of the story. Double the price of a car, and nobody imports it. But the wall kept getting taller. Through additional trade measures, the combined tariff burden on a Chinese-manufactured EV entering the United States now exceeds 125% as of early 2026. The practical result is exactly what you would expect. No Chinese-manufactured passenger vehicles are sold in the US market at any meaningful volume. The tariff alone is enough to make direct imports commercially pointless. Which raises an obvious question. If the tariff already does the job, why build a second wall at all? The smartphone on wheels. The answer is that policymakers decided tariffs could be dodged, and that the deeper worry was never really about price. It was about data and control. This is where the story stops being a trade story and becomes a technology story. It begins on the 29th of February, 2024, when the Biden administration ordered the Commerce Department to investigate the national security risks of connected vehicles and issued an advance notice of proposed rulemaking. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo became the public voice of the argument, and her framing is worth hearing directly because it explains everything that follows. She described connected cars as smartphones on wheels. She said they collect huge amounts of sensitive data on the driver's personal information, biometric information, where the car goes. Then she pushed the idea into genuinely unsettling territory. It was not just about surveillance, it was about remote control. She said, Imagine if there were thousands or hundreds of thousands of Chinese connected vehicles on American roads that could be immediately and simultaneously disabled by somebody in Beijing. She drew a direct comparison to another Chinese technology fight, saying, it's not totally different than the threat of TikTok, which Congress took action on. Early on, she signaled how far the government was willing to go, warning in May 2024 that the United States could take extreme action and ban Chinese connected vehicles outright. Biden framed it as basic reciprocity, pointing out that China restricts American cars and asking, why should connected vehicles from China be allowed to operate in our country without safeguards? That investigation turned into an actual rule. The Commerce Department's Bureau of Industry and Security announced the final connected vehicle rule on the 14th of January 2025, published it in the Federal Register on January 16, and it took effect on the 17th of March 2025. Here is what it does. It prohibits the importation and sale of certain connected vehicle hardware or software that has been designed, developed, manufactured, or supplied by entities subject to the influence of the Chinese or Russian governments. The stated fear is that companies from these countries could be compelled to share data or allow remote access to connected vehicles operating on American roads. For a technical audience, the specifics matter. The rule zeroes in on two systems. The first is the vehicle connectivity system, the hardware and software that lets a car talk to the outside world. The second is the automated driving system, the software stack behind self-driving and driver assistance features, and it is phased in by model year. The software prohibitions take effect for model year 2027 vehicles. The hardware prohibitions take effect for model year 2030, or the 1st of January 2029, for units not tied to a specific model year. For now, the rule applies only to passenger vehicles under 10,001 pounds, with the agency noting that a separate rule for commercial vehicles is still forthcoming. Now put the two walls side by side. The tariff makes Chinese EVs too expensive to import. The connected vehicle rule makes them essentially illegal to sell if their core software or hardware traces back to China, no matter where the car is finally assembled. That last part is the crucial detail. Even if a Chinese automaker built a factory on United States soil, the finished vehicles could not contain Chinese-developed software or hardware in their connected or autonomous systems. You cannot tariff your way past this rule, and you cannot factory your way past it either. The threat that justifies the wall. To understand why the United States is going to these lengths, you have to look at what it is actually reacting to, because the competitive threat is not imaginary. The company at the center of the anxiety is BYD, which stands for Build Your Dreams, China's largest EV maker, based in Shenzhen and led by CEO Wang Chuanfu. In 2024, BYD reported revenue of 777 billion yuan, about $107 billion, on deliveries of 4.27 million cars, counting both fully electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids. That was enough to surpass Tesla, whose 2024 revenue was $97.7 billion on 1.79 million battery-powered vehicles, and BYD is just one player in a much larger wave. China shipped more than 7 million vehicles overseas in 2025, most of them EVs and plug-in hybrids, with overall exports rising 21% year-on-year. But the number that truly rattled Detroit was not a sales figure. It was that price tag on the Seagull. Around $12,000 in China, under $10,000 for the short-range version, originally about 69,800 yuan. Set that against a US average EV price above $52,000. And the Seagull is not a little cheaper. It is a completely different category of affordable. The natural assumption is that a car that cheap must be garbage. The evidence says otherwise. A company called Caresoft Global bought a Seagull, shipped it to the United States, and tore it apart. Their president, Terry Wyakowski, a former chief engineer on General Motors pickup trucks, called the car a clarion call for a U.S. industry he said is years behind China in designing low-cost EVs. He described the entire car as an exercise in efficiency. The secret is not one clever trick. It is vertical integration. BYD makes most of its own parts and uses lower-cost lithium iron phosphate chemistry through its blade battery technology. As Wachowski put it, by having that all in-house and vertically integrated, there's an incredible advantage that they have. The discipline shows up in tiny engineering choices. The Seagull has only one windshield wiper, which eliminates one motor and one wiper arm and saves weight, cost, and labor. Those savings compound. The version Caresoft tested weighs 2,734 pounds, about 900 pounds less than a Chevrolet Bolt, and it still travels 252 miles on a charge. Observers keep reaching for the same historical comparison to describe the stakes. The arrival of cheap Chinese EVs could shake up the global auto industry the way Japanese automakers did during the oil crises of the 1970s. The cracks in the wall. No wall is perfect, and the enforcement details reveal some genuinely surprising gaps. The first is that the connected vehicle rule catches Western brands, not just Chinese ones. Volvo and its sister company Polestar are Swedish marques, but they are owned by China's Geely, and that ownership, combined with manufacturing in China, meant Volvo faced a ban under the rule. Volvo eventually received United States government approval in 2026 to keep selling vehicles that use Chinese-developed and maintained software, and it has been shifting production, including the Polestar 3, to its factory in South Carolina. The rule also reaches into autonomous vehicle testing, targeting the ability of Chinese firms like Baidu's Apollo Unit, Pony.ai, and WeRide to test self-driving systems on American roads. The second gap is geographic, and it is almost comic in its simplicity. Reporting has documented BYD vehicles wearing Mexican license plates being spotted in Texas and California, using a customs loophole that lets Mexican residents drive their foreign-registered cars across the border. That is a loophole U.S. lawmakers are now actively trying to close. Which brings us to the present, and the wall is not coming down. Despite a change in administration, both mechanisms are still standing and have actually hardened. The Trump administration kept the tariff, with Trump reportedly calling the 100% Chinese car tariff about the only thing Biden did good. On the 9th of April 2026, U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer confirmed the administration had no plans to alter the connected vehicle ban. And Congress has moved to make it permanent through a bipartisan bill, the Connected Vehicle Security Act of 2026, which would turn the current rule into actual law and make it far harder to ever reverse. The other side of the argument, for balance, this approach is genuinely contested. Not everyone accepts the security framing at face value. Critics argue the national security language can mask straightforward protectionism, and they point out that connected cars are vulnerable to hackers regardless of where they are built. One outlet went as far as to describe a strain of yellow peril xenophobia in the debate. There is also a consumer cost argument. Analysts at institutions like UC Berkeley's Energy Institute have argued that letting Chinese brands compete directly would be the fastest route to broader EV adoption in the United States, and that keeping them out leaves American buyers without access to truly affordable electric cars. China rejects the rationale outright, with Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning urging the United States to stop overstretching the concept of national security. And here is the sharpest contrast of all. While Washington doubled down, its northern neighbor did the opposite. Canada struck a deal with Beijing to allow up to 49,000 Chinese-made EVs into the country every year at a 6.1% tariff rate, replacing a 100% surtax it had imposed in late 2024, with the quota set to expand to 70,000 vehicles annually by 2030. Two neighboring countries, the same cars, completely opposite decisions. So, let us tie this back to where we started. Chinese EVs are not kept out of the United States by one dramatic ban. They are kept out by a 100% tariff. Now, part of a combined burden exceeding 125%, that makes importing them pointless, layered on top of a connected vehicle rule that treats their software and hardware as a national security threat and blocks them even if they are assembled somewhere else. Behind both walls is a single fear: that a company like BYD, selling a well-built electric car for under $10,000, could do to Detroit what Japan did in the 1970s, and that the data flowing through millions of connected cars is simply too sensitive to hand to a geopolitical rival. Whether you see that as smart security policy or protectionism wearing a security costume, the direction is unmistakable. With Congress now moving to write the rules into law, this wall is being reinforced, not removed. If this changed how you think about the cars on the road and the technology hidden inside them, give it a like and subscribe for more videos about the policy and technology quietly reshaping the world. And I want to hear from you in the comments. If the world's cheapest, best-selling electric cars are being kept out on national security grounds, is that a wall protecting you Or a wall keeping something better out of your reach?